Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Sunday School Bonanza, brought to you by This Week in Mormons. Happy to be here with you for your 10-minute gospel doctrine preparation, make you a better person. Before we get to the lesson, I'd like to welcome a new co-host this week, dear friend, great man, solid, righteous priesthood holder, Dustin Homer is here with us right now. Hi, Dustin.
Hi, Jeff. Happy to be here.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks for the unfoundedly high praise, but
Dustin's legit. All right, folks, he's legit. The ladies love him, then they hate him, but they do love him. He's very sought after. All right, he's a beautiful man. If they should have hired him as the Mormon bachelor, is what we've learned.
And with that preface,
anyway, so this week's lesson 27, of course, all things denote there is a God. So we're in Alma 30 and 31, only a couple chapters this week, but a lot goes on. Last week, of course, we covered all sorts of things. Anti-Nephi Lehi is getting settled, land of Jershon, all these various things. But now the Nephites have settled. They've had peace for a long time after the Lamanites were attacking, the Ammonites, the people of Ammon and all that stuff for a while. But then this guy shows up, starts disrupting things. And his name is Korihor, and they refer to him as an antichrist. So, we throw that around a lot. Like, what is an antichrist? What do you think, sir?
Well, I've been thinking about this one a lot, and I think like you say, that we kind of throw this one around without thinking about it too much. But at a straightforward level, antichrist, somebody who fights against the Christ, somebody who disagrees, and who tries to basically mitigate the Lord's work. And so I think in a very straightforward way, that's kind of what Korihor is somebody who's trying to fight against Jesus Christ, someone who's trying to make people disbelieve Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But I think there's more to it than that too. And
absolutely.
I think it's interesting, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, so sorry for the spoiler alert. But at the end of the chapter, Korihor kind of confesses his visit from the devil that sort of set him down this path, and he talks about how the devil taught him things that were pleasing to the carnal mind, and that's what he's been teaching people. So he's been teaching people the things of the devil that are pleasing to like the natural man, to the carnal mind, that pull them away from Jesus Christ. And I think that's an antichrist, anything that pulls us away from Christ. Absolutely.
Well, I think it's a good definition. And of course, we see this. We see that whether on his own accord or beguiled by the adversary, he was dragging the people, the Nephites, all down. He was wandering around Zarahemla, causing all sorts of problems. Now, if we see in chapter 30, in verses 12 through 18, I'm sure your teacher will have you read this and talk about the various false teachings of Korihor. So I guess we can go over a few of these quickly. One that he, of course, claims is that there will be no Christ, because you cannot know things that you have not seen. Classic argument, right?
Makes sense.
But the next one, of course, he argues, is that no man can know of anything which is to come. Basically denying the whole element of prophecy, of that ability of prophets, seers, revelators to accomplish things. That the belief in the atonement, this one's really sad now that I think about it, is the effect of a frenzied mind. And how often do we see attack on religion even today, that the believing in these things of religion is the result of that, a frenzied mind, a wacky demeanor, an unsound understanding of what's real and what's not and what's important. And it's amazing to think, I think, that even way back then, in this Book of Mormon era, that same sort of persecution of religion and of a belief system existed. And then, of course, he argues after that every man prospers according to his genius, and every man shall conquer according to his own strength, which is denying, God's hand in everything. Then whatsoever a man does is no crime, and when a man is dead, that is the end thereof. So suffice it to say, I would deem Korihor an atheist of sorts.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Or perhaps an agnostic, but basically, so he does not believe that really anything matters. This life is what matters. There's no Christ. There's no anything. We're just here, and then we die, and that's the end of it. Now, the thing that makes me sad about this is we see this all the time in the Book of Mormon. Why are there people who actually believe him? They keep seeing the miracles they've had. They just had all these wars with the Lamanites following the arrival of the Anti-Nephi Lehites. And yet people were still led astray by Korihor. And I think the power of an Antichrist is incredible when you think about it. Anyone can be led astray. Most of us have had friends in the church who we thought had the most solid testimonies in the world, and yet next thing you know, you wake up one day and they're like, yeah, I totally bailed. It's gone. And sadly, I think many of us have seen that.
I agree. And I think one of the really interesting things here, though, is that this focus on today, right? Korihor taught about today. He talked about things. He talked about things that were immediate. He talked about pleasure. He taught about things that would kind of bring people really temporary satisfaction in the moment, and completely disregard everything else that was really important. And I think that's a huge part of what our world focuses on is things that are really temporary, things that entertain us, things that bring us pleasure. And I think we it's useful in the Korihor context to realize that even though we have bad people today who kind of directly revile our religion or revile Christianity and sort of fight against it. It's more than just people who are kind of like directly speaking out against religion. It's a broader problem we have where there's a lot of evil things that distract our attention from what's most important. And I think we can interpret Korihor. I think we can interpret this Antichrist pretty broadly to realize it's something that affects all of us every single day.
Yeah, absolutely does. And so after he's been doing this, Korihor is eventually brought before Alma, who's back from his missionary adventures, and he's still the high priest of the church, and he's brought before him. And I think there's an interesting, we're going to get into a little bit briefly, but before that, we were talking a bit before how Mormon talks about sort of the freedom of every man to believe as his own conscience dictates, right? If I can paraphrase well enough. And I've always thought it's interesting in these sections because when read many ways, one could look at this and say, well, wait a minute, isn't Korihor just basically saying, I believe as I believe, and I have freedom of speech to do it? And yet it feels like he's brought before Alma and sort of like tried and condemned. But we have to look very clearly at the actual back and forth between he and Alma to really get a better understanding of that, and understand that Alma acted solely in his capacity, not in a legal capacity, but in a church capacity. And then what happened to Korihor afterwards was just the results of the world. So.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, Korihor kicked around a lot of the different, sort of the different districts within the land of Zarahemla, went to the different peoples, and they didn't really know what to do with him. And so finally, he ends up in front of the president of the church, who, brought on, a curse that came from God, but it had nothing to do really with the legal authority in the land. So,
anyway, so
section 2.
Well, yes, this is all you, buddy. Anyways, but tell us a little bit, what happens when Korihor and Alma kind of have a back and forth.
And it's funny how how Mormon sort of presents this back and forth, because it talks about how Korihor raises up in great swelling words against Alma and against the other kind of high priests of the land, and basically doesn't hold back. He just sort of lays into all of the accusations, all the false teachings he's been teaching people all around the land of the Nephites. He just goes into it. And actually, it's interesting, he makes even a personal attack on Alma and the other priests, right? Where he talks about them sort of glutting themselves on the labors of the people, or basically how they're sort of doing this to get gain, and that they're using their position in the church to make money. And he makes personal attacks, and he really just sort of demonstrates his evil and sort of just lays out all of these false teachings that he's been saying to try and pull people away from Christ. And Alma responds, and I think that this is this is interesting if we kind of highlight the points. Korihor makes these false accusations against the church leaders. Alma responds and just says, we don't do this. This is false. You know how the church works. And then Korihor goes on, it gets escalated, and just outright denies God. Claims that there's no God, and makes this, he just really sort of reviles against anybody who does believe in God. And then this is where we get to what I'd say is really sort of the climax of the chapter, or the meat of the chapter, when Alma and Korihor have this dialogue about, what it means to believe, and about, and Alma really testifies of his belief in God. And I think this is really powerful, and I think everyone's going to be reading these verses. But Korihor says, "Why should I believe in something I've never seen?" Just this outright. Why should I believe in all these, what he calls ridiculous things, if I can't see them, if I can't really experience them? And Alma comes back, and so Korihor asks for evidence, asks for signs, and Alma comes back and says, "What evidence do you have for me that there isn't a God?"
Yeah.
Just completely turns it around, and I think it's really interesting. He just says, show me a reason that there isn't a God. And then he goes on to say, I have everything. I have the entire world. I have the planets, and I have the heavens, and I have this earth, and I have the feelings, and I have all these things that show me that there's a God, and show me evidence that I'm wrong, and really refutes everything that Korihor tries to say. I think that gives us a lot to think about. And I think the biggest take-home lesson, though, is how do we act in situations like this? What do we do when we find ourselves faced with a challenge to our beliefs?
Yeah, and I think that's the best way to. We can't always respond like with just the simple like, well, how can you tell me it's not? That's not always going to work, obviously, because there are people who will attack the church and our beliefs for any number of reasons. And I think you and I had a discussion this week, some of which might be from honest misunderstandings and a lack of understanding fundamental things in the church and in church's history and this and that. But when you get to the core principles, yeah, no one can prove to me that there is not a God, And if anything, I feel like everything we see around us testifies to the absolute, divinity of all these things. I mean, it's hard for me to walk around. I'm sure we have suffering and we have problems and issues in the world, but just to see the world and see what's around and think like, there's no way this just came together through some, was that the Higgs boson? There's no boson or boson, bonon, whatever it's called.
Whatever it's called.
Anyway,
magically.
There's God's hand is in everything. That's great. So moving along as we finish up here, then Alma, this very separate Alma 31, Alma gets a little kind of crack team together, goes to hit up the Zoramites. The Zoramites are a Nephite people named after Zoram, if we all remember Zoram from way back in the day. The Zoramites have strayed a little bit, though. They find they I really view this as a case of people who were not necessarily inherently apostate, but perhaps ones who were not cultivated and watched after as closely as they should have been. And as generations and time went on, they just slowly adopted, inappropriate and apostate practices. And I think that's the norm. I mean, we see throughout the New Testament, the Pauline epistles, the whole reason those exist is because Paul is writing letters like, guys, let me correct you here. Hold on, Ephesians, let me correct you here. Hold on, guys, let's figure all this out. And it's basically the exact same thing, except in this case, Alma and a group of people in person are going to go and see what the Zoramites are up to and try to figure it out. One thing I love is in this chapter, Zeezrom makes another appearance, and I just love that Zeezrom appears so many chapters earlier, being converted and having his own issues. And then you see, kind of like Gideon, the same thing. Like you see him show up later on, like he's still faithful. He's kind of part of a relied upon group of people to go and find the Zoramites. So
yeah, I agree.
Please.
Well, I think it's kind of amazing what Alma and the Dream Team, as Jeff said, find when they come and
But will they be better than the ones from 1992? That is the question.
And they come and observe the Zoramites and are like pretty appalled by what they see, where these people have kind of missed the entire point of religious worship. And so they have, they pray on their tower and they have these rote prayers and they have kind of a lot of like self-aggrandizing things that they do, but they've completely missed the point of real religion. And it makes a really clear point that they come and do that, say like once a week, they come and say these prayers, they recite these prayers, and then go home and forget about it. And
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That their religion is effectively, they show up on Rameumptom, do their thing, and then that's it. Their religion is not a day-to-day way of life at all.
And I think there's a couple lessons. One is like, has our religion become rote? I think we have something to think about, from sort of what Alma and his friends discover in this place, that, I think we can all kind of fall into those places in our lives where we get a little bit Zoramite-like. And then also, whether or not we're in that place, like a lot of people are. And we are in the position of Alma and the other missionaries to really try and go reclaim them like Alma does. So I mean, it's a pretty relevant, I think, piece of scripture for us to think about.
It's a great chapter because we can become that way, or our own individual prayers becoming too predictable to this and that. And one thing that always stuck out at me is the way the Zoramites basically say in their prayers, we think that we are effectively superior to our brethren, and that's like just the egoism that goes along with that. It just baffles me. And I love the difference in the Zoramite prayer. And then Alma, the way he prays for them, realizing that the Zoramites, he calls them precious. He begs for wisdom. He begs for all these things. He gives a very humble prayer seeking for the guidance to properly, teach and educate these people and help them, come down from what they're doing, because obviously they're very, very, very straight. And I don't recall, did the scripture specify to what extent they were successful in reclaiming the Zoramites?
It really...
I've always felt it's kind of vague, right? It's more the lesson in how Alma goes about it as opposed to how many souls were saved or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I don't know. We go on in the following chapters, and next week's lesson, stay tuned. But I mean, we get into some really interesting stuff about how the poor, the people come and are converted, and certain people among the Zoramites do come and are converted. And I mean, I think there's a lot of powerful things that happen.
Zoram. You just wanted to stay in Jerusalem, didn't you, buddy?
But I was gonna say, and I think, I don't know, something I was thinking as you were talking, Jeff, is I think just like all of us, sometimes are in the same shoes of the Zoramites, where maybe we do start thinking we're a little bit better. We do get prideful.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, yeah. So anyway, that's what I found so interesting about this chapter, is I think I've been on both sides of this fence.
Absolutely.
But the way that they pray and the way that Alma approaches this experience, I think has tremendous lessons for us in the way that we, share the gospel and try to bless people in all of our lives. That prayer and that kind of love and humility. So.
Yeah. So that's going to do it. Great lesson this week. So once again, this was lesson 27. All things denote there is a God. And of course, you can find this at thisweekinmormons.com and on iTunes, and listen for our regular This Week in Mormons podcast. Find us on facebook.com/thisweekinmormons, at The Real Twim on Twitter, and shoot us an email, contact@thisweekinmormons.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you found this on YouTube, you can find it on iTunes. You can find it anywhere. Dustin, thanks for being with us this week.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you, buddy. Hope you all get something out of this. Please let us know how we're doing. And this has been Sunday School Bonanza, lesson 27 once again. All things denote there is a God, and have a great Sabbath. Bye-bye.